So from what I'm hearing here, correct me if I'm wrong, but another thing that might be a silver lining of this issue is that this did not set a poor precedent for future fights. Am I correct, or am I way off?
I think that's correct. Essentially, there wasn't a decision. The answer was the court didn't analyze, didn't review, didn't go into the constitutionality, which was the petition. And so there hasn't been a finding that those vaccine card orders were constitutional, or that they passed the Section 1 analysis if they weren't. So that analysis we didn't get that.
Certainly breaking news, hot off the press information I have for you guys here. I just received the decision that was handed down from the Honorable Chief Justice Christopher Hinkson, and that is involving a case that many of you have gotten behind. You have supported the challenge against British Columbia's discriminatory vaccine passports that hopefully we won't see return, but possibly will, and its extremely rigid exemption regime. You helped us do that fight by donating what you can at our special website called Fight Vaccine Passports, where all the donations go to our charity partners at the Democracy Fund so that they could hire amazing lawyers, which they did in this case, one of which you're going to hear from in this report, which is William Katz from JSS Barristers. Now, that is the same law firm that brought out that huge win for religious freedom in Canada when it involves your donations that you guys brought forward. Thank you very much for Pastor Arter. Now, in this ruling, where we are right now in this chapter anyways of this fight, I call it a Pontius Pilate sort of take the path of least resistant move. You tell me what you think. I haven't even had a chance to fully read through it, but I did, like I said, interview Mr. Katz, who you're going to hear from right now. And then I will catch up with you at the very end for some more of my banter.
All right, William Katz from JSS Barristers, one of the amazing lawyers who took on this fight, this challenge through the Democracy Fund. Thanks for being on Rebel News.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I've had butterflies in my stomach. I haven't even had a chance to look at the ruling when I'm here about to interview you. And I know you have. I'm going to dive through it right after. But tell us in short, what did Chief Justice Hinkson rule?
Essentially, the ruling, Drea, is that he declined to consider the petitioner's arguments for the charter violations or the application of Section 1. His finding was that two of the petitioners, Ms. Slykehouse and Ms. Eliason, had not completed the exemption process, did not go into the difficulties or the frustrations in trying to complete that process, but said because they hadn't, he would decline to rule on the charter violations and the application of Section 1, which was in essence what the petition was for. And then in Mr. Prendeville's case, he found that Mr. Prendeville had received an exemption and as a result chose not to consider the charter violations or the application of Section 1. And essentially it's unclear why that's the case and why the Chief Justice decided to rule in that way.
So it's almost like a washing of hands of the situation. What about all of the evidence that you guys provided to show the difficulties it takes to try and get an exemption for some of the plaintiffs?
In reviewing the decision, it doesn't appear that the Chief Justice turned his mind to that evidence.
This is so disheartening. And then I guess for the plaintiff that did finally receive an exemption, there was still the period in time where, you know, they were a second-class citizen and such, and, you know, the having to show the exemption wherever you go in some ways is a bit discriminatory. Was there any discussion on that as far as how that fits with our constitutional rights?
Unfortunately, the conclusion is simply that Chief Justice declined to consider it. And so that may be a grounds of appeal, and we'll certainly look into those options.
Well, I'm sorry to hear it. I mean, anybody who's been worried about the loss of liberties over the last year and a half or what have you with COVID-19 knows that this is an uphill battle that you guys were fighting and that it needed to be fought. Let's talk just a little bit more about the possibility of an appeal. What would that look like? How would things if the issue is that, okay, well, if they have an exemption, I'm not going to consider it. And if they didn't get an exemption, although they tried, I'm not going to consider it. How do you appeal that?
That would in essence be the appeal. Our concerns was that the vaccine passports themselves were put in place as a coercive measure, as a form of negative punishment. It was a constitutional concern. The petitions themselves were to focus on the constitutionality and the violation of Section 1. Essentially, the Chief Justice or the decision has declined to analyze those violations and those breaches. And so that would be essentially the grounds of appeal. Would be that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that analysis. We want to know what charter violations, essentially, to determine whether or not a charter violation took place. And that is not here in the decision. There's no discussion as to whether or not a charter violation took place in the petition orders themselves prior to the creation of an exemption process, or that one existed at all. Regardless of how difficult it may have been to obtain an exemption, none of that analysis was reviewed, and certainly not any of the evidence on that the vaccine passports themselves were a coercive technique rather than medical.
Mm-hmm. And there was, I covered this case as well as the other cases that were challenging it. There was evidence brought for it that showed all that. So basically no discussion of how that plays. Obviously, the battle is not over. It would seem as though we might be falling into another season where we could see these vaccine passports return. So thank you so much for the time that you put into this, and for everybody who's gotten behind this fight, this very important fight. We have to have the sort of evidence that was brought forward and placed in front of the justice. That has to happen in order for us to set some sort of precedent. So in this case, it's like I call it, from what I'm hearing, sort of a washing of hands of the situation, but hopefully we see something different if an appeal happens, and we will update everybody on that. Any last words you want to add to the people who've been waiting so patiently for this judgment?
I think the always to try to find any silver lining that we can. Silver linings that are important is that, for one, Chief Justice found that the petitioners did have standing, and those arguments were dispensed with from the respondents, from the government. They were dispensed with, and that the argument was moot. That was an argument that was put forth by the respondents, that there was no reason to have a hearing because the vaccine passports or vaccine card orders had been revoked, and that was found to not hold weight. So the two findings of standing and that the issue is not moot were important. And certainly we would have liked to have seen some discussion as to the charter violations and the application of Section 1, which was the heart of the petition. So we will review the cases, especially the other cases that are coming out. We've only had a chance to review our own, haven't had a chance to review the 3 others that we understand were released today.
Exactly. And I am in touch with some of those people. So you guys will be able to find out all the details. And probably as you're watching this, there's more than what we discussed together right now at fightvaccinepassports.com. That is also where you can chip in to donate the continued costs to do these fights and other ones that our charity partners at the Democracy Fund have taken on to fight for civil liberties in the era of life with COVID-19 across this country. Again, thank you so much. You guys, I thought you guys did an amazing job. The evidence that was put forward was solid. That's my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a judge. Too bad I wasn't the judge in the situation. But one thing I know is that lawyers like you guys who are willing to take this case on, from JSS barristers who have had huge wins, Pastor Arthur being one of them, you guys are not quitters, and you will keep continuing fighting for us in Canada. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Drea, for having me, and thank you for your kind comments. It was certainly we put as much evidence as we could put forward, and it was a shame that it doesn't seem to have been discussed. So,
Is this a matter of Justice Hinkson taking the path of least resistance? Not ruling on whether or not somebody who does their part, like Mr. Prendeville, and gets vaccinated for COVID-19 ends up with a heart injury, despite how young and athletic he is, called pericarditis, and then has to wait months to be treated like a normal human being, permitted to go into a movie, per se, with his friends, and then finally does get some sort of paper exemption that I'm sure the snotty-nosed teenager at the restaurant who sits you doesn't even recognize to be real, perhaps thinks it's some sort of conspiracy since the legacy state-backed media ignores vaccine injuries altogether for the most part. Yeah, is that something Justice Hinkson should have considered? Should he have ruled in that situation about whether or not Mr. Prendeville, whether or not his constitutional rights have been infringed upon? Or what about the other two examples who tried their best? Another person who goes numb after getting the vaccine, after doing her part, and wants to get an exemption, but finds it hard to find a doctor who's willing to give one, who's not scared of, I don't know, maybe losing their license. But she didn't jump through enough hoops to get the very stringent, hit the criteria that Dr. Bonnie Henry has given in order to get an exemption. And of course, she doesn't leave it up to family doctors who know you best. You have to go through her. And it's already been proven through the courts, if you followed my reports on this, that she didn't even answer a lot of those situations. She didn't even get to a lot of those messages, but yet everything has to go through the public health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry. And then you have another mom like Plaintiff Eliason, who has extremely rare diseases that keep her at sometimes confined to her bedroom, and she just gets back on her feet health-wise, and the world is telling her she has to take a novel intervention that has zero long-term studies, that her family doctor says, you know what, you've been through so much, I don't think you should have this. And because there is a struggle to get an exemption, this woman whose entire family is vaccinated, she doesn't get to go to her daughter's recital. She doesn't get to visit her dying grandfather. She is less than. She is second class, but she is also not hearing a ruling in this situation as to whether or not her rights have been infringed upon because she didn't get all of the hoops done, according to Justice Hinkson, about getting a nearly, as we've reported on many times, a very difficult to get exemption. Let me know what you think in the comments. One thing I do know is if there's any lawyers to take on this case, it would be the ones at JSS Barrister, and they don't give up easily, as we saw in the fight for Pastor Arthur. So please continue to get behind this case by donating. Hopefully we see an appeal. If not, the money all goes to the Democracy Fund so they take on the other cases. We're doing many challenges, which you can find out at fightvaccinepassports.com. So please continue to donate there. I will keep you informed, as I have, unlike state-backed media, on all the cases. In the spring, I went into the court, brought you guys with me, live tweeted, kept you updated on 5 vaccine-related cases that went to Supreme Court that if you Google, the legacy media has pretty much all but ignored. Now, one of those cases, I have another update coming for you. It was actually struck. It was not heard. And it was told that you basically can start over and go through some of those issues, and that is the Action for Canada and lawyer Rocco Galati case. So I have a report coming up on that soon, but I also have a report on other vaccine passport challenges that I've reported on because they got their judgment as well today. So I'm in contact with them. I'm going to be having reports coming up with them as well. Did Justice Hinkson ignore charter rights in all of those cases? I want to know. Did he find an out? Or am I wrong? Maybe he went there with other cases. You will find out from reports you can trust at fightvaccinepassports.com. I'm Drea Humphrey for Rebel News, and let's continue to fight for medical freedoms to be restored in this once great nation.
The remains of 215 children have been found in a mass grave in Canada.
Many of you know that just over a year ago, the discovery of the remains of 215 children was found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School at the Tecumseh First Nation. But what if I were to show you that what I just said wasn't true, and that in fact, a year later, not a single body has been found?
This mass grave is a painful reminder of the genocide.
Canada's leaders aren't condemning the burning of churches. No, they're endorsing the burning of churches.
A juvenile rib bone that surfaced in the same area.
You'd be surprised the number of people who say, you know, I'm a doctor, I'm a paramedic. This is definitely a human bone, and it's definitely not.
Looks like the chief.
It is.
Could be you.